Salam and welcome back to Somali Dispatch's YouTube channel. My name is Abdul Qadir Goulet. Somaliland police have been frequently accused of torture and abuse of power in recent years. And recently, politicians and journalists who were arrested for participating and covering a pro-democracy rally in Hargeisa, a constitutional right, have been confirmed that they have been arrested and tortured by both plainclothes individuals and police unit that's funded in part by the UK government. Elyaas Jama, a UK citizen and a member of Wadani Party Central Committee, was one of the arrested participants in the pro-democracy rally in Hargeisa on June 9th, 2022. Upon his release a couple of days ago, he gave a detailed information of his experiences in Mandera Jail and Central Hargeisa Jail, and I have contacted him in Hargeisa. Elyaas, welcome to Somali Dispatch. Thank you for your time tonight here and for taking the time to explain to our audiences what happened on June 9th in Hargeisa. If you can tell us how and where you were arrested would be great.
Okay, thank you for having me. Firstly, I was arrested on the 9th of June, and there was a peaceful protest that took place on the 9th of June. And I was one of the members that were peacefully exercising my right to demonstrate peacefully. And this is in accordance with the Constitution, Article 32. I was arrested by unmarked cars. I was shunted at the front. I was shunted at the front and the back of my vehicle, and there was armed men with guns that took me hostage and took me to the police station. They didn't identify themselves, so I don't know who they were.
Right, and what time was that? Was it during the protest that this happened?
No, this was around 1:30 after the protest was suppressed, and the protest was brutally cracked down by the autocratic and authoritarian regime.
Right. Can you give us a brief or show us or tell us a picture or show us a picture of how things were at the protest, what the police were doing, and what the pro-democracy protesters were doing at the march?
Well, basically, we were just marching, and there were some police officers that were marching beside us, and that weren't doing nothing. But there were also other police officers that were like beating people, shooting. There was tear gas involved, and they tried to assassinate the presidential candidate. They were shooting like at people, and there was like, he actually got hit by a tear gas. And there's videos and evidence them trying to run over the presidential candidate.
Mm-hmm. And what was the protest about for those of us who are not familiar with what took place in Hargeisa, Somaliland on June 9th, 2022?
Well, basically, the protest was about we were calling for the elections to be held on the 13th of November, and the presidential wants he doesn't want any elections to take place, so he just wants to extend his stay at power.
Right. Who else was arrested with you or at that date?
There were prominent politicians like the former Minister of Information, Abdullah Mohammed Hussein. There are shadow ministers of Wadani Party, the Minister of Interior, Mohammed Farah. There were prominent sub-TV and journalists, and Hamza Gele, and the head of the Wadani Party, Mr. Hamarji.
Right. So when everybody got to the jail and was arrested at the central jail in Hargeisa, you had some troubling experiences there, as you recently told the press in Hargeisa upon your release after close to a month in jail. Can you give us a detailed information on how things went when you got to the jail?
Well, there was no due process that was followed. It was like, and they have to tell you what they're charging you or arresting you with. Basically, we got to the police station, they took our belts, phones, money, and people were beaten inside the check-in. Like when you go to police station, they check in, they take your name and so on. So there was like lots of animosity. People, like one guy had his testicles removed recently. He was getting beaten next to me. And there was like other ministers that were getting slapped around by the forces. So basically we got put into this small 4x4 cell, and there was like 40 people in there.
Mm-hmm.
And there were former prisoners that were there already. I was shocked at the state of the prisoners. They were staffed. There were like some underage people that, like, there was like 12-year-olds that were detained without trial, that are just being held there. They don't get fed. And some lucky people get their families to bring them food, but the officers were eating it in front of them, eating their food in front of them. So I was like dismayed at the conditions and the conditions that it's like horrendous.
Right. So who were the individuals that were torturing detainees, as you've said in the presser that you held in Hargeisa? You gave some details of who those were, and you already mentioned some of them were plainclothes. What was the motivation?
Well, basically, the people that were doing the torturing, and it was like two people, and if you disobeyed or you were targeted. Remember, like I was targeted because I wasn't committing anything. They followed me, and like most of the people that were arrested, there was about 50 people that were arrested. Next day, they took 14 people that they knew that they wanted to like crack down on. So they were doing the torturing. It's like uniform officers that were doing the torturing inside the police station. Those ones without the uniform, they were beating people inside the OB and outside, but they weren't doing the torturing. People that were doing the torturing were existing police officers inside the police station.
Right. As you know, anyone watching could tell by your accent, you're a dual citizen. Have you had any access to the UK or British House in Hargeisa? Have you had any access to those offices or embassies?
Yeah, well, and while I was in jail, I smuggled out a letter to the British Foreign Office and the consulate and British House. I gave one of the visitors a letter with all my details and consent. They came to the Ministry of Interior and tried to arrange a visit, but access was denied, as they told me after I came out. I had a meeting with them. After I came out, I had several meetings with them and telephone chats. And I'm due to have another interview tomorrow.
Are you saying the authorities denied the British representatives in Somaliland or in Somalia to have to come and see you and talk to you about what's happening?
Yes, and yes, as the consular officer confirmed to me, they came there several times, had a meeting with them, and like there's a merry-go-round. You have to go and get a letter from the court, then go here, then there. So like they were basically denied access.
Much is said about the links between the UK and Somaliland, specifically the security services and politics, as well as UK support Somaliland, not just in their quest for recognition, as the government in Hargeisa claims, but also funds some of these security services. What, as a UK citizen, what was that experience like for you, knowing, as you said at the presser, that British and UK taxpayers are funding some of these actions by the police in Hargeisa?
Yeah, I'm really saddened by the offense and like how the money is misused by the Somaliland regime, authoritarian regime. And basically the money is to fund democracy and development, is to train people in due process, like to follow the law. When people come to the station, like to have their rights, not to have their rights violated. But the money is used to set up subclan militia, as I called it, because that's what it is. Because you have a son, a father, an uncle, a cousin, all in the same forces, the RRU or the special branch in Somaliland, that are trying to scare people into submitting to Musabihi's wishes. So basically, the money for RRU is to stop terrorism, not to land grab. We know recently the RRU shot a young woman, they shot by her breast, and Musabihi displaced 120 people by taking over 1,000 hectares. This is the same thing Israel is doing in the West Bank. That's happening in Somaliland. It's happening in the south of Hargeisa, and it's also happening in the west of Hargeisa, near Halea. And so it's just like the authorities are using the police and special forces to fight terrorism, to grab land, to suppress democracy, to suppress the media, and to like scare people into submitting into their ways and to cling to power.
For our audiences, the RRU is the Rapid Response Unit, funded by mainly Britain, but also other Western countries. Recently, you've seen, President Bihi, in which you spoke of, making links with the U.S. government and trying to have some sort of a relations there, and perhaps further the quest for recognition there. Somaliland has been known for its implementation in democracy. But lately, with police brutality, the Somaliland reputation took a hit. What sort of interaction or reaction do you expect from the Western countries that prop up Somaliland government as it was?
Well, I expect them to put Mr. Bihi back in line and to tell him to hold elections and to go back to democratization of the country, because now we're slowly moving into dictatorship.
Right. The proximity of those so-called, you just called them subclan militias. What is the proximity of those individuals to the presidency and Musa Bihi Abdi?
Well, it was like his second cousin, second uncle, second nephew. His son is the head of the, is like the so-called, is the head of the intelligence services, who's like leading the brutal crackdown on protesters. He was the head of the guy. He was the guy who was heading the subclan militia,
right,
cracking down on protesters.
Right. Recently, President Musa Bihi appointed a fellow UK, citizen, dual citizen, to be the head of the intelligence services. Do you know of him? What do you think that is about?
Yeah, well, I know of him, and
mind you, he's a gentleman. The gentleman we're talking about, Faisal, was also one of the policemen in the UK in the past.
Yes, and well, it's just the figure. The guy who's running the show is the president's son. He's just there as a front figure.
Could you confirm for us, if you have the knowledge, that Britain recently either suspended or cut off funds to the RRU?
Well, I've heard of them, and I will have a meeting with them regarding this matter.
Mm-hmm.
And we want to change how things are run here. We want them to set up a monitoring and evaluation group to visit all the prisons, to visit all the police stations, and to set up a due process. So to train police officers how to handle, because police officers should be like the population's best friend.
Right.
But rather it's like their enemies. Like every month, 2 or 3 people are killed by the police. Recently, a young guy was shot. You've heard about the young woman that was shot by a police officer, and for petty crimes.
Right. Lastly, as a British Somalilander, what would you do next in your quest to get justice?
Well, it's not justice just for me, it's justice for all Somaliland. The struggle, we've been through a lot in the past 40 years. We've been through armed struggle, we had civil wars, we're trying to set up a democratization, and we won't let that democratization process take a left turn or right turn into dictatorship. We want to put it back on track, and by all means, even if I get arrested, I'll keep on going to put this country back on road to democratization.
I appreciate your time tonight, Elyaas Jama, a Central Committee member of the Wadani opposition party in Somaliland. He was talking to us from Hargeisa, giving us details of his experience in jail after participating at a pro-democracy rally in Hargeisa on June 9th, 2022. Him and other officials and journalists were released just a couple of days ago. Thank you, Elyaas. We appreciate the time tonight.
Thank you for having me.